Now to the incredible pictures from France. Now, we've already seen America tearing itself apart with race protests and race riots. Makes you wonder, really, if we can end tribalism, you know, these ethnic or racial loyalties and conflicts that just seem, I don't know, so hardwired into the human DNA. But the US race riots then spread to Paris and also led to violence there and attacks on police. In fact, police are still being attacked almost daily by leftists, anarchists, and by African minorities, each with their own grievance against the state or the police. Now, those scenes are bad enough. Thank God we haven't seen much like that here. But I'll tell you what, something I've never seen here, far, far worse, even more startling scenes from France, in the small city of Dijon. Now, for a few days now, it's had armed ethnic gangs running riot, burning stuff, and shooting up the streets. These guys are even shooting police drones out of the sky and causing general mayhem. Now, this war seems to be essentially Chechen gangs, Chechens from the old Soviet Union, battling Algerian or North African gangs who are defending their turf. I tell you, the weaponry on both sides is incredible. And there, right in the open, no worries about that. Joining me is Rowan Dean, editor of The Spectator Australia, author and host of Outsiders on Sky every Sunday, where it's absolutely rating its socks off. You can't miss it. And last night, of course, the death of the Aussie larrikin, question mark, also had terrific numbers. Rowan, I'm still obsessing about the question mark, you know. It's not like you didn't lack an opinion. But look, this tribal warfare on French soil, what does it tell you?
Well, Andrew, I think you're being a little bit unfair. I think you've got to understand that this is all the fault of colonialism. This is the fault of white supremacy. But Dijon, for example, in much the same way that coon cheese is an example of how evil Australians are, Dijon mustard is a great example of how colonialism is rife in everyday products in France. I'll tell you about Dijon. Dijon mustard goes right back. You can associate it with King Philip VI of France in 1336, who first ate Dijon mustard. So this is clearly a colonial imperial product. So what you're seeing there is riots between two separate gangs, Andrew. And these gangs, you have to understand, are the victims of white supremacy and the victims of racism, clearly, because they came to France expecting they'd be able to work in the Dijon mustard factories, you turning mustard seeds into normal everyday products that they could sell. But they found that they couldn't, and the jobs were all taken, and the welfare was very generous. But they decided that if they took poppy seeds, they could do a similar product, which the French call les narcotiques or les drogues. And so these different gangs, or these different ethnic groups, I shouldn't call them gangs, decided that they could both give Dijon a new industry to rival mustard. And this is basically les narcotiques, the narcotics. And what you have here is, very strangely, they are of the same religion, these two groups. The Chechens are Muslims from Chechnya who left Chechnya after the wars. And the other group who are involved in this traffic or this industry are also Islamic gangs from North Africa. But weirdly, they seem to have not gone to religious classes or something because they haven't understood that Islam is the religion of peace. They've missed that lesson. And these two Islamic ethnic groups are busily fighting each other with guns, with Kalashnikovs, which you must understand, Andrew, is a cultural means of interpretation for the Chechens. Yes, of course, yes. We must be very generous and understand that that's the traditional way that Chechens communicate with each other, is via the Kalashnikov. So they're talking to the Arabs who don't like it. So they're fighting back, and so they're basically using everything within their power to obliterate each other. And we should really understand that it's our fault, Andrew. We shouldn't ever have been so cruel in our past.
Well, maybe you should apologise on behalf of white people. Go over there and apologise, you know, just say, look, we're terribly sorry. I know Chechens are also sort of whitish, I guess. Maybe apologise on behalf of Christians or something. You've got to apologise for something. You've got to just crawl in the dirt. But the point here is, Rowan, this sort of thing is really, really depressing me because, look, call me stupid, but I grew up on that Martin Luther King quote about judging people not by the colour of the skin, the content of the character. And I thought, you know, it'd be a battle, but we could get rid of racism and we could have this sort of colourblind, accept everyone kind of society based on their character only. But I don't know. I'm seeing a retreat into tribalism and to the racism on one side, perhaps, but also as an industry, the industry of complaint. I'm thinking maybe tribalism is us and we can't get away from it, in which case you wonder, is this whole multiculturalism experiment a toxic joke that's going to overwhelm us?
Well, I think the two things. First, I would say, Andrew, is that we have successfully created or lived up to Martin Luther King's dream. Throughout the West, we did it. We actually did it. We created societies that ignored racism, that judged people on the color of their skin, created meritocracies where anybody had the opportunity to be whatever they wanted to be. Hence, a black man became president of the United States. Hence, a woman became the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Hence, in Australia, we have one of the most successful multiracial nations on earth. But what has happened is this poisonous ideology of multiculturalism, and it's critical to draw the distinction between the two, because multiculturalism suggests, and let's go right back to Enoch Powell, warned about this way back in the 60s, and he was utterly demonized for it. He said, if you treat all cultures as equally based, if you give them all the same equal rights, you will invariably have conflict, because certain cultures do not recognize Martin Luther King's dream. Certain cultures believe entirely in their own supremacy, entirely in their own, and these are not white cultures, these are other cultures.
I've got you, but that's why I thought the struggle should always be to realise our better selves. In a country where one premier is called Palaszczuk, another's called Berejiklian, we can do this. And yet I see this multiculturalism policy, this pandering to tribalism is just going to destroy us. Now, I don't think we're going to be France, at least not anytime soon, but gee, that's got to be a warning. Meanwhile, you know, talking about the politics of race, one of the deadliest things, one of the worst things about it, this habit of, you know, acknowledgement of country. Like, you don't belong unless someone in your ancestry was Aboriginal. You know, we acknowledge this and that. The ABC is now treating as a national scandal, a private joke by some New South Wales police, an insult to Aborigines, it says, at a Christmas party. Members of the Counter-Terrorism Tactical Operations Unit went to a pub at Surrey Hills, and one of them used that official acknowledgement of country, reworded it to refer to the TOU, the Tactical Operations Unit. He said, I would like to acknowledge the people of the TOU nation, who are the traditional protectors of this land. I would also like to pay my respects to members past and present of the TOU nation and extend that respect to other tactical people present. Now, and he said, you know, I'd like to acknowledge the functions being held on the traditional land that the TOU nation protect every day. Now, Rowan, you might think that's a lame joke, you might, whatever, but you'll think it's a joke. Despite that, it's been attacked by the ABC, by Aboriginal activists, by an academic, by the Assistant Commissioner of Police, all lavishly reported by the ABC in tones of, oh my God, there's a national funeral going on. The unit's now going to have an internal review into this, plus reassessment, plus training, including working with Aboriginal communities. Is no punishment too much for this sacrilege?
Well, this is the problem, Andrew. We have inverted the basic common idea of freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of choice, freedom of opportunity. We've inverted it. And now you can say, well, you're not sufficiently respecting whatever minority cause or whatever minority group it is. We saw this after the same-sex marriage debate, where you're not sufficiently respecting transgenders, or now it's you're not sufficiently respecting Indigenous Australians and the idea of First Nations. But this whole artifice is fraudulent for the simple reason, forget whatever the history of Indigenous Australia is before pre-colonial times. Whatever the history is, it doesn't matter. The idea of First Nations is an American left-wing import. Much of the things that we see in this country have been imported by the left from America. The left don't have much of an imagination, I've got to tell you. They don't have a sense of humor and they don't have an imagination. So they just borrow, hollis bolus, these concepts from America almost always and set them up here and try to recreate them here. So Black Lives Matter suddenly is an indigenous cause. And now we have this idea of the First Nations, and if you're not sufficiently respectful to the tradition of the First Nation, forgetting, of course, that the Welcome to Country was created by Ernie Dingo in the 1970s,
Correct.
Along with a white guy, a white fella, as a marketing exercise. That's what it is.
Honestly,
now,
it's a joke.
If we don't sufficiently respect it, we're in the wrong.
If they had made a joke, if they had put different words to God Save the Queen, if they'd run up a different flag, you know, with a Union Jack cut out or something, they would not be ordered for official re-education. This is just a joke. It's just so obscene. It's like you've got to pray to the new gods. It's just, I don't get it.
People have to resist it, and they have to resist it in their own work. If they're bosses, they should be standing back from this stuff and not kowtowing to it.
Rowan Dean, thank you so much indeed for your time.